Welcome to the Catholic Midlife podcast, where we address the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. This is the time, my friends, for a deeper renewal of your Christian vocation. Come and enter into the freedom of Christ that allows you to be the person you were created to be, because there's an amazing, awesome, exciting next season of life waiting for you. Hello, and welcome to the Catholic Midlife podcast. I'm Karen Herbert, and I'm here with my co-host, Curtis.
Yes, you are. Hello, everybody.
I certainly am. And Curtis, we have this week a comment from a listener who says, Karen and Curtis, I enjoyed and found food for thought in your podcast episode, Ask the Right Questions About Suffering. And I'm looking forward to listening to the Suffering in the Process episode that just dropped.
Oh, well, that's a great comment. We really appreciate hearing from all of our listeners with your thoughts and observations and everything else. And speaking of suffering, it's still the season of suffering.
It still is.
Still the present age, my friends.
Oh, man.
It is the present age. And there's lots of kinds of suffering.
Sure.
So it's so you won't get bored.
Oh. So if I ask the question, why are there different kinds of suffering?
So you won't get bored.
Would be,
somewhere it is written. Well, there's bodily pain and acute pain that can just be dominating when you're feeling a lot of it, or chronic pain, even if it's not so sharp, it just wearing us down, so wearing to have that after you day after day. And moral suffering, that's kind of a catch-all term for
what is moral suffering exactly?
Well, I guess it's non-physical pain. It's just the fact that we're awake, conscious creatures, and we have our thoughts and feelings, and creates many ways to suffer, and disappointments, regrets, disagreements, lack of understanding. People are mad at you, you're mad at them, being excluded, being diminished. A lot of these fall in the mental, emotional, and spiritual categories. But it's just, there's lots of ways for this moral suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking too, just about, maybe it goes in this category, but just the kinds of mental and emotional suffering that go along with, say, mental illness or depression or high anxiety, or just all of the ways that that kind of suffering can really be debilitating and take over your life. Yeah,
and be dominating.
Yes.
And of course, there's grief, which is
death.
So enormous in our life. It's going to affect us for the rest of our entire lives.
Yes.
As we go through these things. Here's one, consciousness of sin. I just sort of threw this in. A moral theologian wrote it, and he said, well, that's the suffering that moves us to repentance. And I just thought, wow, well, there's a form of suffering I haven't thought of as its own category before.
Right. I think, too, sometimes a really big kind of suffering is watching other people suffer, people we love, people we can't help who are in deep pain, like our kids, for sure. It's very painful to watch them suffer.
That's maybe the worst time.
Yeah.
That's so hard. And I think one point I wanted to make out of all this is, look, there's not a right way to suffer. We're not going to tell you how you should be doing suffering. But we do think that, there's some good things to know about, well, kind of in the how-to suffering, things that might help you.
Yeah. Yeah. So this episode, really, we wanted to focus on something that we find very interesting and also helpful, which is thinking about the kind of energy that we're bringing to our experiences of suffering, or situations or issues that create suffering. How are we showing up in the midst of this suffering?
Yeah. And if you can kind of recognize your energy in a situation, it's going to tell you a lot. So let's just start with really what we would call the lowest level of energy, which call it type 1. And that's victim energy. It's when
Yeah.
you really feel like a victim.
The thing that helps me to understand this type of energy is when it's like you just feel helpless, like you have no power, and it doesn't matter what you do, you can't change anything, and you can't fix anything, and you can't make anything better, and there doesn't seem to be any purpose in this.
Yeah, the whole thing is so pointless, and it's all just happening to me. It doesn't matter what I do or don't do or whatever. It's just not going to change. It's a monolith.
Yeah. Yeah. And this energy, I know it well, so I could talk about it. I just feel stuck. I feel kind of trapped and weak. And it really makes me feel like I have no idea what to do. And if I could think of something to do, I probably would just avoid doing it because I really wouldn't think that it's going to make any difference.
So those kinds of thoughts and emotions, they lead to really nothing happening, just sort of wallowing.
Yeah, or ruminating or spinning my wheels or just getting stuck in circles of worry or regret or guilt or self-blame, just rerunning things, wishing that they were somehow different.
What's an example of this, maybe in your life, Karen?
Well, I don't know if this is what you're thinking of, but the thing that pops to mind for me is just having a chronic illness, having a chronic disease that isn't really getting that much better that I can tell, ups and downs, but no super breakthroughs. And I often have this kind of energy around that, feeling like, well, I've done all this stuff. It doesn't matter what else I do. It probably won't work. I'm just going to be stuck with this for the rest of my life. And that's depressing.
It's lay down on the couch energy.
Yes. That's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Karen. And we'll just run with that example as we go through these, if you can hang in there for that.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. So what else? So many ways to suffer. How about your young adult is making a choice that you think is just stinky, rotten, brainless, harmful.
Yeah, harmful. Ugh, that is painful.
And, my level 1 energy is, well, it's just, I'm helpless, I'm powerless, and
it just figures this would happen to my kid.
Yeah, why me?
Yeah, why me is level 1 for sure.
Yeah. And so that's an example of where that goes.
Sure. One thing that's interesting is this is a kind of energy I think we do have with, very serious forms of grief and loss and encountering death, especially of our loved ones. And that's just natural, right? We're not really saying this is an energy you never want or you'll never have. It can be really draining and it can make us feel really bad. And there are times when it's perfectly appropriate that this kind of energy will be there for some period of time for us.
Yeah, well, that's why we have it available to us, is to dive into our shell and protect ourselves. The challenge with all these levels is to start to recognize them and to consider, well, is this serving me? Is it serving the people around me? Is it serving my goals?
Sure.
Is it serving the kingdom?
So what about another type of energy? What about type 2 energy?
Type 2 energy. Now we're talking, honey. This is some fighting energy.
Ah, it's your kind of energy.
Yeah, this is payback energy. This is, you do that to me and, it's Chicago rules, right? You whack me upside the head and I'll bring my big gun and shoot you or something.
Yeah.
So it's antagonism, struggle, resistance, but it also manifests as frustration, defiance, feelings like I've got to fight for my position here so that people don't walk over me.
Yeah, if you if you're having this sense that you have to look at, well, what's wrong here, at what's broken, and who's at fault, who's to blame, somebody's at the bottom of this, and I have to address it. I have to look out. I can't really trust people. And life is really hard. You just feel like life is hard. If you're angry with life or the world or someone else, that's this kind of energy at work in you. And it is that fighting energy.
Yeah, and these levels are really very interesting. I can't resist. I mean, one way this level 2 manifests itself sometimes is just this desire to be in control of everything.
Right.
Because you can't trust God. You can't trust the universe. And so you got to reach out and make sure everything's going according to the plan, because otherwise you're going to get run over. That's level 2.
Yeah. I think about it as I've got to do my best to control the situations around me, or there's just going to be more difficulty and suffering coming my way.
So in this example of the young adult that's going down a road that's bad, you might be angry with them.
Yeah.
You might be telling them how stupid they are and how pointless their behavior is. Of course, that's not going to get you very far.
Right.
Or maybe you're gonna blame yourself or your spouse. Well, this is what you did wrong. This is what we did wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Or whatever it is. You can have this kind of bitterness and anger and resentment, and that's level 2 energy for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And, in some situations and scenarios, the thing is, there is likely to be someone at fault. I can think of many situations where you're suffering because someone else is to blame. And that's part of the struggle here is sometimes this is something very real that you're dealing with that's creating this energy in you.
Right. And so anger moves us to action.
It does.
But it's very powerful. Mm-hmm. And the trick here is always, is it going to destroy us? Is it going to destroy the people around us? Or is it going to be channeled and be motivating for us and for others? And are we going to live there? Living in a state of anger. It's not really a dwelling place. It is a transition kind of energy or emotion to get you moving.
Yeah.
Get others moving.
Well, I'm thinking about a lot of other people who have the same chronic illness that I have, and how difficult it has been for them to get a diagnosis, to get any kind of real treatment, to get anybody to listen seriously to their symptoms. There's people who go to the doctor and the doctor says, oh, we don't have that illness in this state, so you don't have it. And I mean, that's enough to drive anyone mad and get their boxing gloves out. And it can be difficult, and it can also inspire people to work for a change and to make changes in the system.
In levels 1 and 2 energy, there's usually a lot of avoidance of suffering or rebellion against suffering, a refusal to accept it. That's a couple marks of those levels.
Sure, you're fighting the reality, or you're avoiding the reality because you don't want to experience it.
So here's a quote from Jacques Philippe. He remarks in his Interior Freedom pamphlet, "The most painful suffering is the suffering we reject. To the pain, we add rebellion, resentment, and the upset this suffering arouses in us. The tension without and in us increases our pain. But when we have the grace to accept suffering and consent to it, it becomes less painful." Then he quotes the Cure d'Ars, who said, apparently, "Peaceful suffering is no longer suffering."
Wow, that's an interesting quote. We talked in, I think it was episode 64, about the importance of acceptance and how key it is to moving into life with engagement and purpose. So I do like this point that a lot of the suffering is suffering we add to the pain we already experience. And the rejection of suffering just mounts onto the suffering, more suffering in our experience. I don't know about this peaceful suffering is no longer suffering, though. I'm going to have to think about that a little bit. I'm not sure I agree with that.
Well, there is an idea, and I don't know, I'm not saying that Cure to Ars believes this, but there is the idea that if you could get to complete acceptance, that your suffering would essentially go away.
So you wouldn't have any suffering at all.
Yeah, so that's sort of the asymptotic point. Well, anyway, probably, it's not like we're aiming for enlightenment. That's not really our goal here. Our goal is to be in the kingdom, and we want to be happy. We want to have the energy that we need to live our lives, to enjoy them, and to love and serve those around us.
Sure. And to engage with the suffering that comes to us with hope and courage and the Holy Spirit in a way that is transformative. And I truly believe acceptance really is key to that. I'm also thinking one of the points here is, you only have so much energy. You only have so much energy. And if out of 100% of energy, 50% of your energy is this conflictual, resentful, bitter type 2 energy, well, then you only have 50% for any other kind. And so part of it is thinking about what's the energy I'm bringing and how is it keeping me from other more powerful types of energy.
Right. So if you're basically wishing things were different, you can spend a lot of time there, and it's blocking you from finding what is possible or what is present for you in your situation. This whole kind of reminds me of, I had to undergo general anesthesia for a surgery a few years ago. And for whatever reason, I really had a dread of it. And so just as the event got closer, I just sort of had this increasing dread of this general anesthesia, and I had all these sort of ideas about it. And finally, the moment came, and I underwent the whole thing, and I woke up, but I didn't remember anything.
Yeah. So the worst part of all that wasn't the thing. It was the fear of the thing.
Yeah.
And that's totally true. I think that's actually a great way of making the point about how we really create our own suffering in many ways.
Yeah. So that's resistance. So the coward dies twice, sort of thing. Well, let's work our way up, Karen.
Yeah.
Level 3.
Type 3 energy. This is the kind of energy where I really can let go of all that anger and bitterness. I could really, I guess the word is rationalize things around me. I feel like I can persevere. I can turn things around. There's a lot of toleration. It's an energy that just lets go of things, doesn't take them personally, is really interested in coping and getting through things and letting go of all of the junk that otherwise might keep us stuck.
Level 3 energy, it's got kind of these two sides to it. One is, hey, I'm an adult, man. I'm just moving on. I'm moving through this, whatever. It's kind of this positive, whatever energy. But on the negative side, too much, whatever, well, that can start to get you in trouble because things are happening around you that really you should be responding to, but you're just saying, oh, whatever.
Sure. So if you keep saying, a lot of conflict just isn't worth it, I'm going to let it go, move on. It's easy then not to address the conflict that really needs to be addressed.
Yeah. And then that's likely to come back and bite you later. And so with your young adult, you can't control them. You have to accept what's happening. You have to accept what they're doing. But, as a parent, you do have some influence, most of
Right.
us anyway, with most of the kids most of the time. And you can, if you're not stuck in those lower levels, then you're in a better position to think, okay, well, how can I use my influence here in this situation?
Right. Right. And there's a way in which just getting through things isn't really digging in and finding the opportunities and the purposes that could be there. So I think I have a lot of this type of energy around my illness. There's a lot of coping mechanisms I've created. There's a lot of things I've let go of. There's a lot of, positivity I've tried to create around moving forward, moving on, making plans, looking for the good, working with other people, and persevering through the illness. And so there's a lot of things that can be very helpful about this energy.
Now we're getting to type 4 energy. And this is really getting, the higher the energy level, the more, let's say, potential you have, the more possibilities you have. And energy level 4, it's the servant leader kind of approach. You have a lot of love and concern. You're focused on others. You're focused on taking care of yourself and others. How can you give? How can you support? Being helpful. That's level 4, is that it's got this big service and fixing and getting it done approach.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of this as tending to be other focused, not always, but focus on how can I really serve other people in their suffering, and this desire to want to get in there and make it better, to fix it, to make it work better, to make people feel better, to make everybody get along. And there's this idea that really, if you just have faith, everything will work out, all of your plans, all of your goals, and this desire to turn things around. And so in the midst of suffering, it can be a very powerful, energetic gift to bring that really digs in there with the love and concern.
You're really starting to feed your hope at that point.
Right.
Hope is so critical. And with your young adult, you can think about approaching them with anger, or level 3 energy is more about kind of getting them to do what you want for their own good.
Mm-hmm.
But level 4 is a more, okay, well, how can I really help you here? And approaching with a different kind of energy, you're gonna have a different kind of conversation or relationship.
One thing I observe about this type 4 energy is it really is person-centered. We really are focused on people even more than outcomes or products or results. It's about the people. At the same time, just like all the other kinds of energy we've discussed, there really is this desire to change things. It's like, I'm going to change things. I'm going to help people and support them, but something needs to be changed here, and we want it to change. And this is really in distinction to this last type of energy we want to talk about. We'll call it type 5 energy, where you've reached a place where you're really at such a level of acceptance that you're not trying to change anything. You're really not trying to change anything because you see everything as an opportunity, even this difficult experience or this experience of suffering.
At level 5, you've really let go of the zero-sum game mentality, where, there's just a piece of pie and we're going to divide it up. And if I get more, you get less. At level 5, we're creating more possibilities.
You really are. It's this belief that everything in my life has meaning and purpose. I just need to open my eyes and transform myself to be able to see it. And when I'm looking for purpose and seeking to create it, then I will find it. And I will have the sense of calm, of inner peace, of confidence to engage with anything because I really believe everything is an opportunity for good.
So here's an example, Karen. Say your young adult really has a good heart and they're pretty smart. They have these strange ideas that they've picked up from who knows where in our rotten culture. And you can see they're going down this road. But maybe it's going to work out for the best for them to undergo their own suffering, their own Via Crucis and Trail of Tears. God's doing a work in them. And taking a very high level perspective can be helpful.
Right. Even this is an opportunity. This thing, whatever
Yeah,
it is.
God can use this for an opportunity. And maybe it's going to be really strong medicine we don't want to see happen, but there it is.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of my chronic illness, I was thinking that I've had some different approaches. And at one point, I remember thinking, well, this is really hard for me. And I don't believe it can stop me from fulfilling my purpose here, my purpose in life. So however difficult it is, it's not going to get in the way of doing what God is calling me to. That was a good approach for a while. I think the difference in this type 5 energy is you're actually saying not just I can fulfill my purpose despite this thing, but this too is part of my purpose. And there's purpose in it, which I can seek, which I can create with God, which I can find and experience and really even rejoice in that purpose, even though it comes through suffering.
Karen, it's really shaped you.
Has it?
Yeah, it's shaped you. And I think a lot of the things you do now and you pursue now, you would not have otherwise.
Interesting.
And, God does meet us in suffering. And if you've ever, I don't know, sometimes you meet people and you just sense they've never been leveled, never been kind of ground down and crushed up.
Yeah.
And there's something about them that's a little sort of, you can just sense that.
Yeah.
That there's things that God has not done in them that they could otherwise. And
that's a very astute point.
I think our listeners can probably relate to that.
Yes.
Now, if you're anything like, there's this scene in Fiddler on the Roof where the man of the house is being chased out by the communist and all his possessions are in a wheelbarrow. And he says, God, we are the chosen people, but would you mind choosing somebody else? So anyway.
Boy, I could relate to that sentiment. It's
yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. Amen. Karen, there's another point I want to make. And it's something Jacques Philippe wrote. He said, refusing to suffer means refusing to live. And I just think this is so important. We don't want to suffer, and we can start to live limited lives. We can be fearful and try to avoid it, but it's coming for us anyway. And one way this shows up is we can start to just shut down emotionally. We can not want to risk with other people, even people we love. And it's kind of like the big master switch is starting to go from 100 down to 50, down to 40, and we're living our lives in a shadow. And refusing to suffer can mean refusing to live. Life takes courage.
It does. So just to end us here on this episode, I think I want to leave our listeners with a question, which is when you consider the elements of suffering in your own life, what kind of energy are you bringing to them? What kind of energy are you bringing to your situation? And is it the kind of energy that's going to create hope and purpose and meaning in your suffering? What kind of energy do you need to engage with hope and meaning and purpose in your suffering? We don't get to know all the answers from the Lord. We don't get to understand all of his purposes, but in hope, we look forward to what we know he has for us, and we enter into everything in this present age with the eyes of the age to come and the life eternal that is waiting for us.
We're living in hope. We're reaching for hope. We are choosing our hope, and we're finding the energy that's going to help us do that. So, my friends, we enjoyed being here with you this week. We would love for you to be back next week and to bring a friend. So you should invite a friend right now. Just send them a quick email or text saying, listen to the Catholic Midlife podcast. And we'll see you both next week. Thanks for being here with us. The Catholic Midlife podcast is for anyone that wants to receive the abundance of life that God has for each one of us. Take a moment right now to tell a friend about us.